My brother kindly invited us to stay at his home rent-free, covering utilities as well. I work in finance, and my husband, Steven, is a mechanic. We live in the house where I grew up, a property steeped in my family's history. It was once the headquarters for my father's business, and there was an expectation that my brother would take over the family enterprise. To prepare, he pursued an economics degree and even furthered his education at Oxford University. After acquiring valuable insights there, he returned to New York to partner with our father in running the business. When our parents decided to retire and relocate, they entrusted my brother with the business and gifted me the family home. Steven and I decided to make it our own, enjoying its proximity to public transportation, shops, hospitals, and schools. The house meets our current needs perfectly and will remain suitable even after our children grow up and move out. We are immensely grateful to my parents for this gift, and we looked forward to building our future here. However, our peace was soon interrupted by frequent visits from my mother-in-law. She consistently pried into my parents' financial situation, asking intrusive questions about their past as business owners. Queries like, "Angela, how much money do your parents have? And what will you inherit when they pass?" left me feeling uncomfortable. I attempted to deflect her curiosity, explaining that I hadn't given it much thought and that the house might be the extent of my inheritance. Yet, she persisted, implying that my parents must have shared their financial plans with me. It seemed as though her interest was rooted in expectations of gaining something from their wealth. Despite my clear boundaries regarding what I would inherit, this situation created an unexpected tension, making me uneasy about her intentions. I chose to keep my concerns from my husband, who has a close relationship with his mother, hoping to avoid any further complications. Then came an utterly shocking turn of events. It was a holiday morning, around 7 a.m., when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a mover, leaving me shocked and bewildered. Before I could process what was happening, my mother-in-law, along with my brother-in-law's family, arrived, announcing that they were moving in. The smirks on their faces sent a chill down my spine. Steven, waking to the commotion, seemed unfazed. When I questioned him, he simply asked, "What's the problem?" He pointed out that our house had ample space for everyone, as if their sudden arrival was entirely normal. The surprises continued when my sister-in-law cheerfully informed me that they had been invited by my brother. She explained that they wouldn't need to pay rent or utilities and were excited about our hospitality. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law began to scrutinize our rooms, assessing them for sunlight and instructing Steven to clear out our belongings. As this surreal scene unfolded, I felt dizzy from the shock. This was our home, yet they were behaving as if they owned the place, opening doors and claiming rooms as their own. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law had long been overbearing, with my sister-in-law even rummaging through my bag without permission on previous occasions. Their brazen behavior continued to intrude on my personal space, and my patience had worn thin. This was the final straw. Frustrated and resolute, I decided to stand my ground. "This is my house," I asserted. "Why are you acting like you own it? I've had enough. I want everyone to leave." It was time to reclaim my space and restore order to our home. Normally, I'm quite composed and avoid raising my voice, but watching these people take over the house my parents entrusted to me pushed me to my breaking point. That's why I lost my temper and shouted at all three of them. However, the situation escalated quickly when one of them snapped back. "How dare you talk to us like that? You're the one who should leave." Moments later, I felt a sharp sting on my cheek. It took me a moment to realize I had been slapped. Shock coursed through me as my cheek throbbed painfully. In that instant, something inside me shattered. Living with people capable of such disrespect was unimaginable. But this house was mine, and I refused to let them treat it like a free hostel. I made the tough decision to leave temporarily. I packed a few essentials and found a month-to-month rental apartment. Although it meant commuting to work, It felt like the only viable option at that moment. Once settled, I called my parents to explain the situation. Even over the phone, I could sense their outrage. My father, who has always balanced his roles as a strict CEO and a caring father, was particularly upset. I hated to involve them, especially as they were finally enjoying their retirement, but I felt I had no choice. My home was being invaded. As I adjusted to life in the rental, I was certain my husband and his family were settling in comfortably at my house. Spurred by suggestions from my brother and father, I decided it was time to take action. A few days later, during a break at work, I checked my phone and saw a slew of missed calls and messages from Stephen. I knew exactly why he was reaching out. It was time to confront this situation head-on. But this time, I would be prepared and not alone in my fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine. In response to the untenable situation at home, I took a decisive step. I contacted the utility companies to disconnect the electricity and water services to the house. Since our home relied entirely on electricity, nothing would function without it. We hadn't installed solar panels, so there was no alternative power source. Given the current heat wave, I imagined that living without these basic necessities would be quite challenging. This action likely triggered the flurry of calls from Stephen, who was probably trying to manage the sudden loss of utilities. Just as I was about to ignore another call from him, he rang again during my break. "Hey, what's going on? There's no power, and the water isn't running. Did you cut off the electricity and water?" His voice was laced with panic. I felt it was reasonable to stop paying for utilities I wasn't using, given that the house was mine and I was no longer living there. "The house belongs to me," I explained, "and now that I'm not there, it doesn't make sense to keep the electricity and water running." I explained to Stephen that keeping the utilities active would mean I'd be responsible for the bills, which didn't seem fair given the circumstances. When I laid out my reasoning, he became extremely upset and demanded that I restore the services immediately. However, just because he wanted them reinstated didn't mean I had to comply. I told him that if they wanted the utilities back, they should pay for them themselves. Every time we discussed finances, his family insisted that since it was my house, I should cover the costs, but their actions suggested otherwise. I had no intention of renewing the utility contracts or asking them to vacate the house. After making my position clear, I ended the call as my break was coming to an end. Later, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law all contacted me with similar demands, lamenting the unbearable heat and the inconvenience of being without water. They wanted me to reconnect the utilities, but my decision was resolute. This was about principle, a crucial step in asserting my boundaries in my own home. After hearing their complaints, I firmly told them to handle the situation themselves and hung up. I suspected they were merely being opportunistic, hoping I would give in so they could continue living comfortably at my expense. Yet, even after a week, there was no indication that they were planning to leave. Realizing I needed to take more decisive action, I consulted with a lawyer from my father's firm. I explained the entire situation and asked him to send a formal notice to my husband, accusing them of trespassing. They had entered and occupied my house without permission, effectively forcing me out and treating it as their own. In the notice, I made it clear that I was seriously considering legal action. This move took Stephen by surprise. He approached me, anxious about the legal ramifications and hoping to find a resolution. Knowing how much they valued their social reputation, I was aware that the threat of a lawsuit would weigh heavily on them. Despite their desire to maintain their lifestyle, they were now trapped in a dilemma between facing legal consequences and convincing me to let them stay. I saw through my husband's intentions, but I refused to listen to his pleas or relent to his requests. In a moment of frustration, he erupted in anger during a call at work, demanding that I reconsider my position, that I should drop the lawyer, and accused me of acting self-righteous. Despite his loud outburst, I remained calm and unaffected, feeling only annoyance at his audacity to assert rights over my property. No matter how much he protested, my stance remained firm. If they continued to squat in my house, legal action would be unavoidable. I ended the call, convinced that further engagement would be a waste of time. I had already discussed potential divorce proceedings with my lawyer. When I returned home later, I noticed missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law but chose not to engage further. I blocked their numbers to prevent any more disruptions. The threat of legal action and the looming possibility of a lawsuit proved too much for my husband's prideful family. Realizing their position was untenable, they packed their bags and vacated the house. With my lawyer's assistance, the divorce negotiations proceeded smoothly. I arranged for a professional cleaning service to refresh the house. Finally, after living separately in a monthly rental, nothing compared to the comfort of returning to my now sparkling clean home. The peace and autonomy I regained made all the effort worthwhile, reaffirming my decision to stand up for my rights and reclaim my space. Once I moved back into my house, I quickly realized it needed some updates and repairs in several areas. I discussed this with my father, who connected me with a reliable contractor. We began planning the renovations, which became an exciting project marking a new beginning in my comfortably solitary life. Living alone brought a sense of freedom that was both exhilarating and soothing. I could relax on my sofa without critique, eat whatever I fancied without comments, and simply enjoy the tranquility. However, this peace was interrupted when I started receiving calls from an unknown number 5 months into my newfound solitude. Initially, I assumed the calls were from the contractor and ignored them, but they kept coming. Eventually, I answered, only to discover it was my ex-husband. We had recently finalized our divorce with a strict agreement, brokered by our lawyers, stating we would never contact each other again. Confused and annoyed by his breach of our agreement, especially since he had changed his number to reach me, I demanded to know why he was calling. Ignoring my questions, he pleaded desperately for me to listen. Despite my reluctance, he launched into an explanation of his situation. His company was experiencing a severe financial crisis, leading to a significant salary cut. To make matters worse, his mother's health was declining, preventing her from working, and his sister-in-law and her husband were struggling financially due to unstable employment. Most of her earnings were going toward her husband's debts. Hearing all this did little to stir my sympathy. The memories of how they had barged into my home, taken control without my consent, and even tried to push me out were still fresh. Their past actions, marked by blatant disregard and disrespect, made it impossible for me to feel anything but disbelief at their current plight. I reminded him that his troubles were his own to manage and reiterated our legal agreement to cease contact. As I hung up, I couldn't help but think it was unbelievable that people who had treated me so poorly now expected sympathy from me. I listened, devoid of any compassion, as my ex-husband continued to describe their dire circumstances. We're in serious trouble. We might not be able to pay our rent or even buy food tomorrow. We used to be a family, right? Please help us, he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Yet his words did nothing to sway my resolve. I recalled how, when I needed support, he did nothing to help. He and my mother-in-law had always looked down on me, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law had joined in, mocking my appearance and traditional views without a second thought for my feelings. My mother-in-law had not only escalated tensions but had relentlessly pressured me to have a child, pushing herbal remedies on me, scheduling unnecessary medical appointments, and spreading harmful rumors among our neighbors about my ability to conceive. Reflecting on these memories, it was clear there had never been a redeeming moment in our marriage. Once kind and supportive, my ex-husband had transformed into a mere puppet of his mother. I vividly recalled an incident after returning from an appointment, learning that my mother-in-law had visited our home, weeping to my husband about wanting to befriend me, only to slander me at every opportunity, both privately and publicly. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law would ridicule me, laughing cruelly at my expense. With such a painful history, how could I even consider helping them now? No matter what you say, my feelings remain unchanged. I cannot help you, I stated firmly. I was resolute in not allowing their current crisis to drag me back into a cycle of manipulation and disrespect. I'm going to hang up now, and please never contact me again. With that, I ended the call and immediately blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband's persistence, he might try to change his number and reach out again, but I was determined to maintain my boundaries, firmly shutting the door on any further attempts by him or his family to pull me back into their troubles. Over the weekend, I planned to change my phone number at the store to avoid any further harassment. However, before I could follow through, my ex-husband and his family breached the agreement we had established through our lawyers. To my shock, they showed up at my house around 10 p.m., banging on the door and yelling, "Open up! Let us in! Take care of us! We're family! You should help us!" Their loud voices shattered the peaceful night, completely disregarding the late hour or the disturbance they were causing to the neighbors. Rather than confront them directly, I tried to communicate through the intercom, urging them to go home and stop causing a scene, but they ignored my pleas, continuing to bang on the door and creating a significant commotion. Feeling overwhelmed by their reckless behavior, I was on the verge of calling the police when I heard sirens approaching. A neighbor had already alerted the authorities. Upon seeing the police, my ex-husband and his companions panicked, mistakenly thinking I had called for help. They attempted to flee, but with a crowd of onlookers gathered, escape was impossible. The police quickly intervened, escorting them away. I provided the police with a full account of the events, explaining their unwarranted intrusion and disruptive behavior. The incident rapidly became the talk of the neighborhood, even reaching my ex-husband's workplace through a coworker who witnessed the chaos. Already struggling with financial difficulties due to a salary cut, the public spectacle and police involvement proved to be the final blow to his professional life. His employer decided to let him go. Without a job and unable to pay his apartment rent, tensions within his family escalated, leading to the collapse of their living arrangement. My ex-husband, Stephen, along with his mother, now resides in public housing, both juggling multiple part-time jobs in a desperate bid to make ends meet, with his mother even eager to contribute financially to their reduced circumstances.